Modern-day games use literary devices such as characterization and metaphor, and have characteristics of electronic literature, making them narrative art. Ebert had said that games could never be art, but later regretted this statement, although he did not amend it. He says that art seeks to lead you to an inevitable conclusion, not a smorgasbord of choices. The 1950 drama Rashomon, directed by Akira Kurasawa, is a film which is known specifically for not following this definition of art. The film uses a plot device in which various characters tell alternative versions of the same story. For the sake of argument, let's sum up art into three umbrella categories. Visual art, like paintings, sketches, and sculpture. Music, and literature. Each category has a specific characteristic. Visual art is something you see. Music is something you hear. Literature is something you read. Each of these arts have evolved and developed genres all of their own. Modern video games have also evolved and encompass characteristics of each of these art forms. Visually speaking, games have come a long way from Atari's Pong, moved through evolutions of Super Mario Bros., evolved again through the games like Final Fantasy and Zelda Ocarina of Time. And made their way to today's masterpieces of Silent Hill, BioShock, and Shadow of the Colossus. Musically, players have listened to the 8-bit MIDI tracks all the way through orchestrated pieces. Most importantly, though, the story has evolved. Where once we knew that we had to rescue the princess, we now know why we have to rescue the princess. By incorporating literary devices, games have become a type of narrative and literature all their own. Electronic literature, specifically. Wikipedia defines electronic literature as a literary genre consisting of works of literature that originate within digital environments and require digital components to be read. In contrast to most ebooks, electronic literature usually cannot be printed, since key elements of the text require computation. For instance, there may be links, multimedia content, animation, or reader interaction in addition to the verbal text. The Electronic Literature Organization lists the following as examples of electronic literature: ebooks, hypertext fiction, and poetry on and off the web. Animated poetry presented in graphical forms, for example Flash and other platforms. Computer art installed which asks viewers to read and otherwise have literary aspects. Conversational characters, also known as chatterbox. Interactive fiction, novels that take the form of emails, SMS messages, or blogs. poems and stories that are generated by computers, either interactively or based on parameters given at the beginning. Collaborative writing projects that allow readers to contribute to the text of a work, literary performances online that develop new ways of writing. Distinctly lacking from their list are video games. Many modern video games exhibit 4 out of 6 characteristics of electronic literature. Games have multimedia content, animation, reader-player interaction, and verbal text or dialogue. Here are a few games which have literary characteristics and electronic literature characteristics.
So my next example is a game, a more recent release. This was a game for Xbox 360, released last year. And developed by Jonathan Blow, Braid is a game that explores our own relationship with our past. In the game, you play as sort of a modern everyman in a Super Mario Bros. Style game. You encounter enemies and collect puzzle pieces, but there's one key difference here, which is here. You can't die. You can always rewind time and make up for your mistakes. So these mechanics, along with the visuals, the audio, and a story that's told in between levels, which I have an example of here. He knows she tried to be forgiving, but who can just shrug away a guilty lie, a stab in the back? Such a mistake will change a relationship irreversibly, even if we have learned from the mistake and would never repeat it. And so the game engages the player. When I play this game, it makes me think of my own history and my mistakes in the past. And could we go back and actually ever make up for what's happened?
In Silent Hill 2, the main character, James, receives a letter from his dead wife telling him that she is waiting at their special place in Silent Hill. The player knows that James is receiving this letter after Mary has died and that he is still troubled by her death. James is a round and dynamic character. He is round because he has a backstory and motive to act the way in which he does throughout the game. He is dynamic because his character has an epiphany change during the story. At the Lakeside Hotel, after watching a video and learning that he murdered his wife, James, a murder named Pyramid Head. James realizes that he has been punishing himself because he created Pyramid Head, and this fight symbolizes James's desire to face reality. The game's most prominent metaphor is the character Pyramid Head, who is generally considered to be a representation of James's bad side. Pyramid Head is also a representation of James's sin and his guilty conscience. James believes he is a good man and would never commit murder, but he does so repeatedly throughout the game. If Pyramid Head is James's sin and conscience, then he is also a representation of James's most honest self, the self who knows he should be punished for committing murder, regardless of the reasons. Pyramid Head is created because it is difficult to see the truth. BioShock is set in 1952. After surviving a mid-Atlantic plane crash and taking his chances on a submarine dock nearby, the main character, Jack, finds himself in the remains of a once magnificent city built on the ocean floor. His only hope of escaping this decaying underwater prison and returning to civilization are the directions given him by a man broadcasting a helpful radio transmission and use of the superpower-inducing wonder drug that led the city to tear itself apart. Plasmids, the primary element of the game, are variants of a drug called Atom, which effectively lifts the limits of human potential, the bio portion of the name BioShock. However, overuse and repeated abuse bring a costly side effect. The chemicals are psychologically addictive and offer diminishing returns over time. Further, Atom itself degrades the user on a genetic level, destroying their physical form in favor of creating a malleable new identity. More and more Atom is needed just to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Ironically, plasmids are first observed to represent freedom, as they allow their users to violate or circumvent the laws of nature. Instead, this illusion of freedom is the means by which Rapture and Jack are enslaved, not only through simple drug lore, but by a sequence of secretly introduced that forces users to follow certain commands. At one point, shortly after the mid-game reveal, Jack must find a way to free himself of the slavery brought on by a would-be mentor, thus allowing him to choose his path for the rest of the game. The player's choices through the game determine whether Jack eventually breaks free of the chains of Atom altogether or is consumed by them. Less subtle is the presence of water throughout the city. Found only in decaying areas, water not only represents the physical degradation of the city where it fails to push the ocean out, but leaks appear in areas that have obviously been corrupted by either outside influence or someone's unfaithfulness to the code of rapture. More than decoration, water is a significant gameplay element, forcing players to recognize its location and context so it may be put to tactical use or avoided whenever other characters in-game electrify it. Shadow of the Colossus is a story about flat characters in a dynamic environment. Almost no dialogue and little out-of-character information is given about the story. What is known as this? You play a character named Wander, who stole an ancient sword and his faithful horse Agro had broken into the Forbidden Land, an unnamed place filled with ruins and a wide variety of landscapes, ranging from deserts and hills to secluded glens and wide-open plains. Here he brings the dead body of a priestess, Mono, and asks an ancient force named Dorman to bring her back from the dead. Dorman, an allegory for the ancient biblical king Nimrod, agrees to, but only after Wander has slain the 16 colossi scattered about the Forbidden Land, sealing his different body parts. Strictly speaking, that is the plot of Shadow of the Colossus. However, as you explore the game's environment, you become inundated with the flavor and story of the place. A never-ending series of questions will bubble in the back of your mind. Who lived here and left these city ruins? What was this arena used for? Were the colossi here, living among them? The game skillfully guides you through the Forbidden Lands and tells you a story all its own along the way. The farther into the game you get, the more barren it becomes, the more you question the god Dorman and what he is asking you to do. Shadow of the Colossus does a brilliant job of letting you find the story, the plot, and even your own drive to finish it as a game. Yes, there is a canon end to the game. You defeat all 16 colossi and become possessed by Dorman, only to be resealed in the temple you start in by priests that have followed Wander into the Forbidden Lands. However, like any good story, it opens itself to allow you to draw your own conclusions or develop your own reader response, and you can take away from it more than just what the creator intended. In my opinion, the story is about betrayal and honor. Clearly, Wander has brought Mono to be revived. He must love her. He must. And Dorman takes advantage of this to push Wander into mindlessly destroying his jailers. He betrays him in the sense that he never tells him the cost of reviving his love. However, as the game unfolds, Wander must become aware of what's happening. Every time he slays a Colossus, black tendrils pierce Wander, and he finds himself back at the Temple of Dorman. Yet he presses on. For love, for honor, for everything. And for his part, Dorman keeps his end of the bargain. Before he is sealed away again by the priests, Dorman revives Mono, proving he is, at least, not completely compassionless.